Welcome to another discussion of Annex Cloud Market Movers, where we bring in experts and luminaries to help us with the current times. Today's topic is near and dear to our heart. It's on the topic of diving deep into customer loyalty and retention, which is a very important topic considering the times. With me joining today, all the way from Sydney, Australia, is Max Savransky. Max is the CEO or the COO of Loyalty and Reward Co. Loyalty and Reward Co. is a strategy firm helping companies with their loyalty programs. Max, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Al.
Wonderful. Max, I think we have a lot to talk about, but more importantly, currently, a lot of companies are revisiting their loyalty programs. If they have one, they're starting to think about whether they've structured it correctly, whether they've got the right incentives in place. If they haven't had one for a while, it's now the right time to start thinking about one because of whatever the economy leads us in the next few sort of months or years. Its retention is going to be very, very important for customers to bank on. With you help a lot of companies build and structure their loyalty programs, but sometimes we go so narrow into implementation that it gets just too mundane. I want to start a little broader with you and have an understanding of how people can think about broadly the psychology of retention as a whole, and maybe you can sort of provide some insights there to start.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really great question. And I think before we dive into psychology, and there are lots of concepts that we can discuss, I think it's really important just to acknowledge that in this day and age, retaining customers actually is quite difficult because of the clutter that is present in the market. And throughout our consulting, I suppose, days, like we've seen a really big shift in consumer expectations, which is really driven by the likes of Amazon and Spotify and Netflix and Uber, and these companies are really framing what consumers want, and what they expect. So before we dive into the psychology, I just want to state that there are really, from my perspective, there are 5 things that I believe consumers want now and expect across all brands. The first thing is they want brands to know who they are and what they like. They want brands to be able to respond to them quickly. They want brands to be able to engage with them wherever they choose, be it web or app or bricks and mortar.
Yep.
They want brands to be able to create a conversation with them and meaning. And they also want brands to be able to reward them for loyalty. So whether that might be in the form of points or status or discounts or whatever it might be. So brands that can deliver to these expectations, from my perspective, will absolutely win in 2020 and beyond. And I think from a loyalty program perspective, that provides a really great vehicle to then be able to let brands formalize this and deliver something meaningful. And I think that really leads us quite nicely into psychology. And it's absolutely worthwhile for brands to understand some interesting psychology concepts, which would then illustrate how applying those concepts can then lead to greater retention. So I want to talk about a few today, and I must note that there are a lot, but we're only going to talk about a few. So the first one is called Operant Conditioning. Now, this is essentially a concept that states that reinforced behavior is repeated. A psychologist by the name of B.F. Skinner, who I'm sure a lot of your listeners have probably heard of, he ran an experiment with rats. And what that was, he put a rat in a box, and there was a lever. When the rat hit that lever, a little pellet of food came out. So the more the rat tapped the lever, the more it then resulted in food. And therefore, the learning was that positive reinforcement resulted in the desired behavior being repeated. So from a brand perspective, to maximize retention, brands should really consider some sort of positive reinforcement for the behavior that they want the member to exhibit. The next one, which I think is quite interesting, is something called social identity theory. And this is essentially a psychologist by the name of Tajfel. He proposed a concept where a person's self-esteem and pride was actually directly based on their membership of different groups. Now, if you consider loyalty program design, a program which then serves to make the member feel a sense of exclusivity and belonging can actually play a central role in the member then adopting the brand, whether it's subconsciously or otherwise, as an element of their own self-definition. And again, for brands who wish to maximize retention, they should really always look at building more of an emotional connection with their members alongside a transactional connection as well. Another one that I want to talk about is something called the Endowed progress effect. Now, this concept states that consumers who are provided with artificial advancement towards a goal actually exhibit greater persistence towards reaching that goal. Now, there was an interesting experiment conducted by a couple of psychologists called Nunez and Drazen, and it was done on a car wash. And what they did was they had two groups of people. The first group of people got a stamp card which had 8 stamps on it, and none were stamped. The second group got a card which had 10 stamps on it, but the first 2 were actually stamped. So there was artificial progress in place there. So in other words, both needed to have to get 8 stamps before they got a free car wash. And what they saw was that the group that already had the 2 stamps actually exhibited a significantly higher redemption rate, which was 34% versus the first group, which was 19%, thereby demonstrating that the artificial advancement was actually something that was driving the. So brands, maximize retention, brands should always get their members started on. And then the last one is something called decision effect theory. And the concept here states that unexpected outcomes actually have a greater emotional impact than expected outcomes, even when the reward is of lower value. This was highlighted back in 1987 by a psychologist called Schwartz. And he ran an experiment in an office where repeatedly throughout the day, he placed a small coin on a photocopier for different people to find. He then interviewed those people, and what he found was that the people who found the coin actually had a significantly better outlook on life in general than those that didn't. And the moral of that story really is that it doesn't cost a lot to make someone's day. And to maximize retention, brands really should consider ways of how to weave in these kinds of surprise and delight strategies into their program design.
No, wonderful. And I think, many of these different things can interweave itself into a great loyalty program. And it didn't seem much in conflict because, you have to reinforce and create the right sort of boundaries and structure of the program. You have to potentially make it interesting for people to, consume the program and not just be a transactional program, but be an emotional program. We call it an experiential program. So it's throughout the customer journey experience in that, capacity, but same sort of idea, have certain ways of artificially advancing, as you mentioned, we call it seeding the program. You give people a seed that can then grow into a tree eventually. Just another sort of way of saying it, and at the same time giving them something that they may not expect, and so it's the unexpected that causes the fun and the excitement to come and re-energize and be part of that community, so to speak. So all of these programs are great, and so how do you apply these concepts or the psychology into then designing a framework for the loyalty program, and how do you apply these in day-to-day methodologies?
So there are a number of different loyalty program design frameworks, and I guess as strategy consultants, we work with a range of clients to work out what the optimal design framework design is for their particular business. Now, it's worthwhile saying that there's absolutely no one-size-fits-all solution. You might find that different frameworks work better for different industries. So what I might do is I might just highlight a few of these today, and then just talk a little bit about what works and what doesn't, and how that loyalty psychology also feeds in as well. So if you look at for example hospitality, so restaurants, cafes, they typically use punch card. framework,
Yeah.
which is, very simple and highly prevalent. So a member will pick up a card, they will purchase a coffee, they will get a stamp, and when they order 5 coffees or 10 coffees, they get a free coffee. So it's really easy to get as well. And this type of framework can absolutely manifest itself in a physical card or a digital card. So if you look at something like hotels.com, they have a digital stamp card where every time the card is stamped, this follows the member staying a night. The difference is in terms of complexity. The difference is that the free room after 10 stays have been completed is that it's actually based on an average value versus in a coffee shop where it's literally just buy 10 get one free.
Yeah.
Now, this framework can be a little bit challenging in the sense that it's quite tough to collect data about the member because they're not really giving any of their data to the retailer or to the restaurant. So, um, but having said that, it's still the most prevalent program in the world. Now, this framework actually leverages that endowed progress effect that I just talked about, where companies can absolutely start members on a journey if they want to, thereby increasing that engagement. The second one is one that I think everyone knows, and that is essentially loyalty currencies. Now, these usually manifest themselves as points programs and can really span from everything from grocery through to banking, through to airline, hotels, retail, business to business, and more. And the most well-known programs in this space, of course, are ones with really large databases with millions of members.
Yeah.
And a really good example of this type of framework is the frequent flyer programs. So we're talking, we're talking. It depends what country, of course, whether it's Australia or the US. We're talking tens of millions of members, and these programs also typically feature a lot of other engagement elements, such as tiers, which might then appeal to the member's sense of social belonging. If you think about how it's structured, there's the points earning element, but then there's also those softer benefits, such as priority boarding and upgrades and lounge access. And members, I should say, in the higher tiers, really feel a sense of belonging, and they really feel that exclusivity and emotional connection. I don't think there's any program in the world that does this as well as the airlines. The other thing is that the larger programs like this are also well set up to capitalize on their existing coalition networks. Again, if you think of a grocery or an airline program, members can earn points across a wide range of retail partners, therefore consistently giving them value. And for the program, what it does is it gives them opportunity to talk to members about a wide range of different things. And this is why throughout what we've seen in COVID-19, even though airlines who weren't flying, they still had a really great opportunity to talk to members about points that they might be able to earn simply by using their co-branded credit card, or an initiative that was really great was to allow members to keep their status credits, for an additional 6 to 12 months, thereby guaranteeing that exclusivity. So these kinds of programs are absolutely really well placed to capitalize. Then there's a design called the member benefits design. Now, this is something that you might find in, say, telecommunications, where if I join a company like Optus, I might have access to a whole bunch of different perks. So these could be anything from discounted movie tickets or pre-sale to certain events, or whatever it might be, and every member gets the same benefit. These are typically really easy to set up and reasonably cost effective, because these benefits can be provided either by the telco or they can be provided by a range of third-party partners. The challenge there is that this type of design really is a little bit problematic, when it comes to driving actual behavioral change. And in this kind of design, a really good opportunity is to leverage the psychological principle called decision effect theory, where you're actually able to incentivize members by surprise delight initiatives. So, you know, if you think of an example where a member might receive some sort of an incentive, you know, based on their anniversary or based on a recharge, something that they're not expecting as part of the standard program. And that's a really good way then to stimulate them and build that emotional connection to that particular brand. And of course, insulate that member from switching to a competitor. And then the last one is just your standard discount program, which a lot of retailers would typically use. And with these kinds of programs, you know, what happens is, whether it's points based or whether it's a straight discount, you know, a member will come in, they will transact, and they can either receive a discount on the spot, you know, based on their spend, or they can receive a delayed discount. And that's a classic example of operant conditioning, you know, where members are continually being rewarded for the behavior that the retailer wants, which is actually that spend. But I think, Al, you're right. You know, the key is really how to stimulate that ongoing engagement over the entire customer life cycle, and that's the toughest thing for brands to achieve, because it involves, you know, it involves putting a plan together that is more than just, you know, the first couple of months of a member joining, and it has to, and there has to be a robust strategy in place to then be able to really maximize, you know, the share of wallet against their competitors, and really make sure that the member is engaging, which is outside of just that purely transactional element.
Absolutely. And I was just having a conversation on LinkedIn with another person on this specific topic of airlines, and while airlines is the most sort of proliferate loyalty membership base that's out there, even though they now have all these coalition networks where you can both earn and burn and still be active in that loyalty program, so to speak, it's not as active as it was before. You couldn't really, the core benefit is challenged. The core, you know, reason program, keep engagement going. One of the things that was very interesting to me that was being explored by some of the smaller airlines now that are trying to be more innovative is they're rewarding for additional behaviors that may not be related to any of those behaviors they have, or social behaviors, and rewarding for feeling safe with, and through the experience of with that did on Twitter about the safe experience they had, and being able to be recognized for that behavior, and ideally even be rewarded for that behavior within the loyalty program, is something that an airline would normally not consider, but now they're starting to. Psychology theory benefit that I might not have otherwise seen, right? So all of these are great, and then sort of keeping people in touch. One of the other things that we look at is enrollment might be sometimes a vanity metric. Like, you might have 1 million members, you might have 750,000 members, or you might have 8 million members, but how do you look at sort of the activation, the engagement rate for those customers, and how active they are on an ongoing basis makes a much bigger difference at the same time for the ultimate success of the program, whatever metric you're trying to drive from a KPI perspective. What I really liked what you mentioned, and I think next thing we should dive deeper into, is that data part of the approach, which is, some of these programs may not lend themselves, especially if they're very broad transactional or punch card type programs, may not really lend themselves to getting enough data. And a loyalty program is a great way to have a full data set of the customer experience on the first touch, to them becoming a purchaser, to becoming a repeat purchaser, to maybe even becoming an advocate of your brand. And so what are your ways that you advise people in sort of being able to use the frameworks to collect enough data about your customer, and then maybe even apply that data towards the improvement of the program or lifetime value as a whole?
So what's really interesting, Al, about your question is that a lot of the clients that we work with, and indeed, because we generally join hundreds and hundreds of loyalty programs. I myself am probably a member of of at least 200 different programs. And one of the things that we see very very often is the lack of a really good quality life cycle marketing strategy. So this, I guess, this just really goes back to the whole piece about engaging and stimulating your members. So if you look at a life cycle, just a very basic life cycle, you've got someone who's then joining. Then there's an onboarding process, and we have a saying in the industry that the seeds of churn are sown through the onboarding process. And you wouldn't believe just how few companies actually have a good quality onboarding process, where the basic would just be a few emails just to educate the member on the program benefits and really give them an opportunity to understand how they can extract value from the program, all the way through to really high quality dynamic communications where over a period of say a couple of weeks, depending on how a member engages, they might receive a different variation of an email or a notification, depending on whatever touch point is being used, and that something like that would be best practice. Then through the growth phase and the advocacy, that's where the growth really is where you want to structure all of your, trigger and, and tactical kind of, I suppose, engagement elements, because that is something that will ensure that the member remains engaged for a much longer period, because after that comes retention and after that comes win back. So the best way to insulate your brand against churn is really, the first step is to put that high quality life cycle strategy in place. Then, what we normally tell our clients is really just make sure you have a test and learn framework in place. And that really just talks to the fact that, once you launch a program or once you redesign a program, really what you need to be doing is you need to continually be evolving and testing what works well with customers and what doesn't. And that really goes back to the customer expectation piece. Like if you have if you think back to all of the things that customers now want, that wasn't necessarily the case 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So it's really just about understanding what's happening in the market. And the good news is that because a lot of these brands have come into the market, have set these expectations, all the other brands have to do is just look at what they're doing and obviously try and replicate to some way around what's going to work best for their customers. And then the last thing in terms of data is, we would strongly recommend to all brands to have some sort of a churn risk scoring, because it's very, very important to understand, the time when your member might look at disengaging. So if I give you a bit of an example, let's say, Al, you have been transacting regularly with the program that you're engaging with on a regular basis. Then all of a sudden, something's gone wrong, and you've called the call center, say several times, and the customer service rep, may have put a frown against, both of those calls. And then after that, there may have been a drop in your spend. Now, something like that should absolutely cause alarm bells, for the marketing team and for the brand, because when they see something like that with a cohort, they really need to put in place a strategy to then re-engage with those customers and then bring them back with either high value campaigns or some kind of other initiative before they fully churn. So the advice that we would give here is that use the data that you have in the most meaningful way to first engage with the customer as much as you can through the life cycle, but also recognize those early disengagement signs, because they are critical. And it, as many people have said before, it costs much less to retain a customer than it does to acquire a new one. So
Yeah, Absolutely. And the test and learn strategy I really like, right? And in addition to engagement, a lot of times, we speak with customers, and they'll think of loyalty programs as one and done. We've created one, we're done. Or maybe we've created some initial launch programs and we are done. But it's an ongoing process of constantly improving, because as customers are changing, the environment is changing. COVID-19 obviously has brought in a whole new set of twists to this whole, process. And so it's a constant strategy of adapting to the times, keeping people engaged, and essentially it's a full life cycle marketing program. It doesn't end. It's just like any other marketing, tactic that you may have. And so I think that's a very important part that you bring in. And at the same time, looking at the key metrics, whether it's churn risk, or lifetime value metrics, as you mentioned, CLV before, or also maybe even look at RFM data or something else that might help with understanding the customers, and being able to market to them appropriately. A lot of times, some of the customers' implementations are limited not just by not having the right strategy or not having the right design framework, or maybe not even having the right data approach, but maybe limited by technology, and not just technology for loyalty. There might be technology across their ecosystem. For a large complex company, there is your ERP, which might hold some data. There might be your marketing cloud that holds some data. You have probably a CDP. You might have some other data warehouse. So there's the technology stack of a large complex company can be made up of a gargantuan elements of different companies and stacks that sort of pull it together and make it all work together. And so from your perspective, while you bring all the strategy and and the processes together, bringing technology to make these processes go to life is probably as important as the technology, the kind of the strategy itself. Any thoughts around sort of the technology part of the equation in the success of a program?
Lots. So certainly, if once brands have an understanding of of their customer from a psychology point of view, they have a good idea of the framework that they want to use, and and they have an understanding of a data approach. You're absolutely right. What they then need is the technology to be able to bring all of that together, and there are there are lots and lots of good quality loyalty platforms out there that can support pretty much anything that marketers, and indeed even on the smaller scale, SMEs need in order to maximize retention. And I guess our advice on this is really just to make sure that you pick and choose a technology vendor or platform that is best suited to your business and what you're trying to achieve. So if we look at if we look at some of the capabilities around good quality loyalty platforms, and we're talking we're really talking over the last 5-10 years, when all of the new technology has really just facilitated anything that you want. So some of the things might be loyalty engine, which is anything that the marketers want around tiers and calculations and and points, offer and promotion engine to allow them to seed any kind of offer to their database through any kind of touch point as well. Reward store, where the large coalition programs, might have a front end reward store where members can redeem points, and that's not typically necessary for a smaller program where all of the benefits are going straight back into the business. Then there's a consideration for multi-market. So you might have a global retailer which needs a technology stack, but what they really need to be looking at is a stack that can support them around the world, not just in a particular area, because there are lots of complexities around there as well. From a marketing execution point of view, there's all of the ability to do the segmentation, develop campaigns, internally within the loyalty platform in their marketing module, or potentially you just use the tech stack for your loyalty and promo needs, and then you use an external marketing engine as well. So all of that is possible too. What's becoming really important now is the whole zero party data capture. And essentially what that means is being able to engage directly with your members and collect information about them, because that, that personalization layer is really something that's going to stimulate and is going to drive engagement. But before you can drive that engagement, you need to understand, like who your customer is and, as I said, and what they want. And then there's the analytics component as well. So all good quality technology stacks, will have an analytics engine. So it's really just understanding, well, what kind of metrics do you need to be able to understand who your customers are, and then be able to market to them both now and into the future as well. So that's a really critical part of any tech stack. And of course, there's all of the other sort of bits and pieces that, we're not going to delve in, but we're talking about things like financial management, which is really important for large scale,
Liability. Yep.
points-based programs, to understand what that liability is. And of course, in this day and age, you want a stack to support all of your security and, fraud mitigation,
Yeah.
and, in the case of Europe, GDPR data requirements. So there's lots and lots of things to consider. And my suggestion to brands who don't necessarily have a lot of skills or know-how in the space is to really consult someone who can help them on that journey, because it's, for most companies, a tech stack is a very large investment, especially when you very correctly pointed out that a lot of companies would have lots and lots of different data sources, and really there could be some significant cost savings, if you're getting a loyalty platform on board that can actually do the things that, three or four other platforms that you currently have, all in the one. So it's well worth some consideration.
No, I think those are all very good points, and I think you laid out a sort of a series of sort of different things that people have to look at when choosing a loyalty technology provider. As you were talking, the only one or two things that additional that came to my mind, just to add to what you said, and I'm sure there's more that you have as well, is just to your specific point, is ensuring that the engagement layer is part of the technology, is part of the technology stack for the loyalty platform, because if you can't engage your audiences and keep them active within the program for a long-term perspective, then again, the purpose may be beaten. So if that is the objective, to keep it emotionally active for the customer, a lot of new age technology platforms provide that, and as well as sort of being able to be flexible and scale for growth, and as things grow as well. And so I think, Max, we've covered sort of the full gamut. I'm very excited about the discussion we've had today around the full, starting from psychology all the way to technology on the two sides of the spectrum. I wanted to thank you for coming here today and providing this advice to our audience. And really quickly, if people wanted to reach out to Loyalty and Reward Co. for advice for loyalty, strategy or support for recreating their loyalty programs or starting a new one, how can they reach you, or how can they reach your team?
So the best way is probably to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. Alternatively, please head to our website, which is rewardco.com.au. And there they'll obviously find a way to get in touch with myself and our team, and find a lot of the thought leadership that we've got on there as well, just around a lot of the blog articles that we write, because our entire team writes lots of quite opinionated pieces around around different loyalty programs and and different elements of engagement, psychology, and so forth. So look, we're always happy to hear from people, and if anyone needs help specifically around loyalty program design, engagement strategies, commercial modeling, and all of that, we would love to hear from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Max. We appreciate you taking the time. For everyone else, if you want to hear from, experts like Max, please go to annexcloud.com/marketmovers. Thank you again, Max. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Al. Appreciate it.